make sure you hit subscribe at the bottom and follow all our partners, Maktaba.bookshop, Narcy Nars on IG, whatever it might be. I'm not really good at promoting on the internet, but here I am promoting on the internet. So I'm currently live from Maktaba Bookshop here in Montreal, 165 St. Paul West, powered by We Are the Medium, but really created by Sundus Abdelhadi, which will be on a following episode. And my people from Metro Creative in the house with the cameras. They're my shooters. Shout out to them. And I got a special guest in the house today. You know, we've been talking for a very long time, which we'll get into in the conversation. But my good brother Jannis is in the house from Habibi Funk and Jakarta Records. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Can you tell me a bit about your upbringing? Like you grew up in Germany?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your family. Like what was music's role in your family when you were coming up as a kid?
No, my mom was a teacher. I mean, my mom, when she was still working, she's retired now. She was a teacher at a school for mentally challenged children. And my dad did a lot of things in his life, but towards the end of his professional career and before retiring, he was like a social worker with people in the Methadone program in Cologne, my hometown. So I don't really come from a household that where music played a bigger role than just being enjoyed the way people on average enjoy music who are not part of the musical scene. What got me into music was, I think in the 10th grade in the school system in Germany, you have to do like a school internship, which is a very low-key version of an internship. You're there for like 3 weeks. And I think I kind of waited way too long to find a spot. And then I had maybe for the second or third time gotten into buying records. I guess I was like 15 at the time. And then I just asked at that one record shop whether I could do my internship there. They were cool. And they liked me, so they kept me on as like for like a student job there for working on Saturdays. So I did this for like 3.5 years.
What's the name of the shop?
Groove Attack. So back then, they still had the Super Rapping label, so they put out like the early J Dilla stuff at the time.
Okay. When you were working there?
Yeah, so everyone at the shop was either a DJ, a producer, running their own like tiny record label situation. So I think that is kind of like the foundational moment for me getting into music. And then like around the time I graduated school, I started Jakarta Records with Malto, who I went to the same school with. And I started studying, but the label was clearly a hobby, and I think for the first 4 or 5 years we lost money. It was something.
Why Jakarta?
You
don't have.
I wish.
Like why the narcissist?
I wish there was a great story to it. It's the clear case of something where we didn't anticipate the name would become relevant ever, because we felt like we were going to put out 2 records because we like the idea and it's going to die. Literally, Malta and I were about to go on holidays, and the first city we flew into was Jakarta. So I think it was a working title becoming a proper name. That's and then amazing. We couldn't change it anymore.
I'm very interested in like beginnings. You know, for me with hip hop and music, the way that it came to me was really formative to what it became for me. I remember the first hip-hop CDs that I got were the year that I left Canada back to the Emirates when my father got a job in Abu Dhabi. And the Wu-Tang record and the NWA record, alongside I was listening to like more like rock or punk music for a long time because of my older sister. But Wu-Tang was the album that I listened to on my way back to the Arab world. And it became like this bridge for me. The music became a bridge for me, right? And that eventually became the language of my career. So Black Star became so close to me in real life because it really was formative for me. Like it's one of those cultures that manifests, right? With you, with specifically archiving these like North African, East African, and Arab artists, what was the starting point? Like what was the first how did it start? Like it's a big like digging effort. Like what was the first moment that brought that into your life?
1000% coincidence.
Wow.
On Jakarta Records, we used to work with a rapper from Ghana called Blitz the Ambassador.
Yeah, of course I know Blitz.
Yeah, I think
shout out Blitz, man. Long time Trinity University alumni.
And I think he doesn't really do music anymore, but he's like a
now.
very director. He just published his first novel, I think. But he played a festival in Morocco. And I stayed like 2 days extra, and like randomly when I come to places, but I was always like that, and even like in Toronto, I didn't go to see the TV tower, I just walk around randomly. So I'm usually I come to places I'm not really interested in, like tourist sites, I just walk. And I come across this little side street, and there was like a small shop with like an old gentleman sitting inside, and it was stacks and stacks and stacks of broken electronics which he was fixing. But then you could see that behind the stacks of broken electronics was stacks of 7-inches. And it turned out the guy used to run a record label and distribution in the 70s and 80s. When that business model ran out, he changed, but he kept that old stock. And I think he was fairly confused that I wanted to see these records, but he was okay with it. And I bought like a huge stack, but there was one which had like this smiling guy with wild hair on the front cover, and on the back side it gave writing credits to the A side to James Brown. So I was like, yeah, all right, this got to be something. And even like in the years before, whenever I went to travel, even though like the Jakarta is more like hip hop and instrumental stuff, I would always do some research, what type of music was there released in the 70s that I might interest, and then I tried to pick up some records. And I came home, and this record by an artist called Fadul turned out to be like an incredibly energetic like take on James Brown. Papa's got a brand new bag, but he made it a song about not trying to drink the next day.
And he's from where?
He was an artist from Casablanca.
Okay, wow.
And then I tried to find out anything about him. Nobody remembered him. And then I guess because we were already running a record label, the idea was born, let's try to find this guy and re-release his music. But
Which is crazy, by the way. That's a crazy feat to like...
Yeah, I think this is only the idea that only came up because I was already I knew how like record label works technically, I guess. And then, but at the same time we wanted to do it properly, so license the music, we split everything 50-50 between us and the artists. So it took us like 2 years of searching. After the first year, we learned that he had already died in the early 90s. But then eventually, through someone telling us about someone, we met a guy who used to be friends with him back in the days. He remembered the neighborhood where his family used to live. And then we literally took like the record cover and went into the coffee places and asked like the old people, do you know this guy? And then eventually someone knew where his parents used to live, who had passed in the meantime. A neighbor knew where his brother lives now, so we like cold called on the doorbell. And I think his brother was in the mosque, but his sister lived next door, so she came over. And yeah, that was the starting point for the first proper release.
That's amazing, man. For it to be the first one and to be so like not difficult, but like hand to hand, you had to knock on the door of the artist, you know?
Yeah, I mean that was also like when it comes to like time span, probably the longest we've invested
into one person,
finding one person. But I think even since then, like we've had multiple stories of like absurd amounts of luck, faith, whatever you want to call it. So I was telling you, I'm meeting the daughter of Ahmed Malik, the Algerian composer, and in his case, we loved his music. I knew some people had tried to re-release it, but they couldn't get in touch with his family. He himself passed away more than 10 years ago. And then I was in Beirut for a DJ gig, and I spoke to a friend of mine, and she was like, I have this one friend in Algeria, I can ask her. And I was like, yeah, do it, but I'm not going to get my hopes up. There's, I don't know how many people live in Algeria, 60 million? Anyhow.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, she calls me and said, Jannis, you won't believe it. My friend's family is the neighbor of the daughter of Ahmed Malek.
Wow. Subhanallah.
And Henia was like, yeah, for me it's totally clear my dad made it happen from heaven. And I was like, yeah, can't argue with that.
You know, I think with our region, with just the colonial conquest of Arab countries and the relationship to not just like imperial forces that created the government structures that existed beyond them, even when the countries were liberated or whatever, quote unquote, but the business structures that came with that, including the mega corporations and the corporate bodies. And then if we get into like Sony and EMI and the record labels that came, a lot of the artists from the 50s onto the 80s or the 90s, you know, the rights of this music was all over the place. There was no rules around bootlegging. I remember being born in the Emirates, one of the first tapes I ever got was Michael Jackson's Bad, and those were like the Thompson recorded tapes on the plastic covers, right? So like, it was a no man's land with music and rights for the artist. How did you know, when you first discovered that in your digging process, how did you go around these loopholes of like, who owns the music? How do I find who owns the music?
I mean, I think it was very much a global issue. I mean, I read this shocking story of Bobby Hebb, the guy who wrote Sunny, and he got a $25 check from the white studio owner, and this is all the money he ever made from the song Sunny. He gave away his master and his publishing rights for a flat buyout.
Wow.
So I think artists getting taken advantage of in the business structure they had to be part of in order to get their music released was really a global phenomenon.
Yeah, I think about around rights and ownership for sure, right? But with us specifically, it was the bootlegging element to it, right?
Sure.
It was out of control.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, totally. And I think especially when the cassette tape age came, because that made bootlegging 10 times easier.
Yeah,
I mean,
so much easier.
Yeah, that killed the music industry, I guess, to a large
The first
extent.
time. Killed it the first time.
Yeah, the first death. Before the reincarnation and the
digital
follow-up death
killing.
again. And for us it was also because being like a German, or at least Germany-based record label that was at least started by a German guy. At this point, the team is much bigger. I think that it felt like we have like a responsibility that our record label is aware of the implications the history of the exchange of North and South has, and to make it even more mandatory that the way how we conduct our business is something we morally feel we can always justify, and we can have a public conversation about what our deal structures look like, and I feel like I can stand behind it.
You can sleep at night.
And this is, for example, something we've always been transparent about it, but after I think release number 9, we even started printing like a summary of the deal terms in the booklet of the
Oh,
release.
wow.
But you are right that when you re-release music, there is sometimes a level of uncertainty when you try to identify the right partner. Because there might be a record, and if you ask who owns this, there might be the producer, the old record label, the artist, and maybe the studio owner, who are all going to say, we own this. When in doubt, we always try to work with the artist themselves.
You know, when I first started talking to you directly, it was around the time I'm still working on that album now, but it was during the pandemic. I was working on the IRAQAFELLA record. And there's this one song that Sundus gave me actually a long time ago by Ziad Rahbani. It's called Shub Hibbak. And man, when I would go to Lebanon, I would dig and try to find, like, how do I get the original copy of this? I had a shitty tape recording of it that I digitized and put on CD. Sent it to my guy Joey, and he flipped it into a beat. And then I was like, man, you know what? Let me hit Jannis and see maybe he knows Ziad, you know? So I'm a huge Ziad Rahbani fan. Not just because of his musical acumen, but like his, there's a certain enigma around him. And I think a big part of it is like, you know, Lebanon PTSD, but also record label PTSD and like just shitty experience in industry in general. And he's an artist, right? Tell me about your relationship with Ziad. I'm very interested, like how you met him, and you know, you don't have to get too personal about it, but tell us a bit about his person.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really, I mean, now I probably would not be able to get in touch with him like the rest of the world. Yeah. But there was this moment before COVID where we've re-released some music by a few people from his circle, like that he was close with and worked with in the late 70s and 80s, that played on all of these iconic records. So I guess I got co-signed by a few people when I was trying to get in touch with him happen. And I guess he goes through these phases where he's available and he does interviews, he sees people, he plays shows, and then he disappears.
He's the J Electronica of Arab music.
Yeah, and I guess I like when he entered into this stage where he went out into the world again. I managed to meet him, and I met him like a few times, maybe 4 or 5 times, both in Beirut, as well as he came to Berlin because he was playing a few shows in Europe. And I think he enjoyed like speaking to me like about jazz and music he enjoys. I think he's probably not keen on having a conversation about the music he recorded for his mother and stuff like this, because I think
that's what he's known for.
Yeah, and this is probably the conversation everyone wants to have with him. So I think he was happy to have a conversation with someone who's not going to ask him about any of this. And yeah, I mean, he's a totally legendary musician whose music we really love, but not only his releases, but he had this studio called Bypass in the 80s, and that was like the hub for a lot of music
in Beirut.
Yeah, for a lot of music getting released in the end by the same 20 people who came together in different groups. And they all then usually would put out a private press cassette tape, and I mean the musician you're talking to in Paris is one of these private press cassette tapes that are nearly impossible to find. Munir Kauli, who was also part of this scene, was kind enough to give me a few of the tapes he had from this day and age.
And when you say gift you these tapes, do they give you the physical tapes you return them, or you have an archive of like the original recording?
There's no workaround. There's a lot of stuff, like we just digitized 200 cassette tapes from Libya, which a Libyan collector was nice enough to borrow them to us. So I spent like 72 hours plus in a hotel room in Cairo, brought a tape deck, and then someone brought them back to Libya. And sometimes, like in this case, Munir is he's an incredible person. Like he also has a track on the second compilation, and he's very much a minimalist. He has 2 sets of shorts, 1 like set of long pairs, 3 white t-shirts, and he made it very clear that if I don't take them, he's gonna throw them away eventually. Wow. Because he doesn't want to have much worldly things around him, I guess. So yeah, there's stuff where people are like, yeah, no, keep it, or and then there's stuff, especially photos. Oftentimes we just digitize them and the originals go back to the artist. But then sometimes there's also like I have this new holy grail photo of Saif Abu Bakr, like the guy from the Scorpions, sitting together with Pele in Kuwait in the late 70s. And Saif, I met him in Kuwait like 2 months ago. He lives there and works there as an English teacher. And he brought like all of the photos he had. And literally he brought like maybe 200 photos. And the only image he had, like I think 2 spare old prints of, was the one with Pele. So I was like, yeah, take one. But yeah, there's no around. But for us, it's not mandatory to have like original material. It's just if the artist is comfortable, there's spare prints. And then it's always cool to have something like this because, for example, with Ahmed Malik, we did like an exhibition about his life at the National Museum of Modern Art in Algiers. Before COVID, so we kind of presented his life's work, his interaction with Algerian cinema, because he did a lot of soundtracks in the 1970s. So then it's obviously cool if you have some like old archival material.
Yeah, of course.
But for the work of re-releasing music, which always come with extensive booklets, which try to tell the story of the artist, the history of it, have photos, but it's not mandatory for us to have any original materials. It's perfectly fine to show up to a meeting with a scanner and we get... the only thing which is important is that we have some sort of an access to the materials at some point, because oftentimes artists will send you, I've posted it on Facebook, but then when they've posted it on Facebook, they mean like a photo of a photo taken like with their own photo. So the only thing is like a certain printable quality, so we're able to use it.
You become like a purveyor of, I don't know many people who have access to all these musicians, and obviously through your research you find a new one and a new one and a new one, right? And it becomes like a cataloging of sorts of an era of music that was highly influenced by the funk and the soul movement in the States that was popping worldwide, but it has this like tinge of whatever authenticity from whatever country we're talking about, right? But being a purveyor of this culture that you're an outsider from, there's a great responsibility that comes with that. So is there ever a conversation that you had with yourself or with some of the people from the team, like, how far can we take this, and what is the master purpose of this whole project? Because if you look at all the Habibi Funk releases now next to each other, it's a library, right? And it's eventually, until the end of it, you're gonna have an amazing library of a certain era that wasn't documented in that era or by our own people due to war or displacement of masters or burning of libraries or whatever, right? So when did you realize that responsibility that you have?
I mean, I try to not necessarily think of, or let me put it like this, we are a record label. And the record label has, our work touches on political subjects, it touches on archival subjects, and we are very well aware of this, and we are trying to be aware of the responsibility and the potential issues that derive from it. But in the end, and I think this is also why I think I would not call Habibi Funk an archive, because I feel like an archive has more of a, and maybe my understanding of it is just off, but it would feel like it would aim for documenting a scene in its entirety. We just take individual releases that we think are great, but currently few people know about them, and we try to amplify or build a bridge between this great music and a new audience. So I think we are maybe contributing to an overall archive, but we are not the archive. And I think also this is especially also important to say for people who maybe have the same background as me, coming from Europe, where I always make sure that for these people it's understood that what we re-release is not like a representation of the music of Lebanon at the time or whatever. Like what we do would probably be considered like the artist underground music or whatever you want to call it. We tend to focus on the artists who, even when they originally released the music, were not very famous, were underdocumented. And then you have obviously also people like Hamid, whose music we reissued, and he's a massive star in Egypt and probably all over the region, but he, like, at least like the music we put out, he was not known for the music we put out. So that was his early work that nobody really knew or cared too much for, at least in comparison to the fame he had towards the 90s and late 80s. But I think it's important to make that distinction, that people understand that what we do is focused on a very, very particular aspect of culture, and it I guess puts more limelight on like the stuff that was like on the outside, on the margins, even back then.
Yeah, I think, you know, we come from an analog era, you know, I'm an 80s baby, so there was an element to consuming music that I needed the physical experience to read the liner notes, to understand where, because back then, you know, we didn't have access to the artists, so you couldn't see the artist in the studio. It was all in your imagination, like how the music was put together. But now there's a new generation of people who, and I had this conversation with Kwali and Yassine separately, but like, there's a certain, not privilege, but a expectation from the listener now that they get everything instantly. So there's no need for research, there's no need for connecting to the music. You can let it pass through, even if it takes the artist 2 years to create something, right? Which is why I love Habibi Funk as a collection of music, because there is still that analog feel to it, obviously being on vinyl.
Yeah.
But during the pandemic, there was a little kickback towards you guys about your, like, the positionality of being European and documenting these things, and it reiterating kind of like museum consumption of culture in Europe from countries that were colonized. Now, I think there's tea in there, yeah. I think it's important to address this. And being a professor, being somebody who's like, I study, I read a lot, so like I know that these things happen serendipitously, especially with music. Your journey is shaped by the experience. It's not something you necessarily chase. How did you deal with that moment when it came to you? And what kind of questions did it make you ask yourself before you deal with the questions that people are asking you or accusing you of? What did it make you ask yourself? Because for sure you had an internal conversation with yourself around it, like, wait, am I adding to this visual history of relationship between the East and the West? And how do I undo that as a collective, you know?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, these conversations have popped up since the beginning, like, here and there.
I didn't know that. 'Cause it came to me at some point from, you know?
Sure, but I mean, you might see it at some point. I obviously always tend to see it because it happens on our, like, we get tagged in it. I mean,
I'll ask it in a second. Sorry.
No. I think these conversations, there's like different kinds. There's like conversations I have with people surrounding it that, for example, might have issues with certain things we do, and we can have a conversation about it, and I might be presented with perspectives that I think about, and I might come to the conclusion, yeah, that's a legit point, or I might feel like, no, I just feel different. And then there is also the way how the internet works. There's also these examples where the conversation is not really a conversation, it's being screamed at. So it's like, and then also it kind of tends to, these type of conversations tend to not be based on research much. Like, I think often the people who are the most vocal in criticizing us are also the ones who have not really a clear idea what we actually do. Like I had messages of like "fuck you" and your techno remixes, and I'm like, "Oh, I don't even know how to do a techno remix. But I don't want, but I'm not trying to brush off that this is a legit conversation that is being had, and it also, these conversations also are important for us, like to check up on us. Like I think we like that also happens in the team internally, because the record label is much bigger than me, and that happens with friends. Like the very easy trivial example I always have is like in the beginning, coming from like a record collector's background, I used to like when I found a record that might not be known by a lot of people, I would post it and say I discovered this record at the flea market yesterday or whatever. And that's like a very normal wording in like the record collectors.
Yeah.
But then this friend of mine pointed out that, yeah, I get what you're saying, but it resonates a bit of a Christoph Columbus vibe, because obviously if you talk about music that comes from a different place where you grew up, you didn't discover it. There's tons of people who probably still know this record. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that makes total sense. Let me not use this word again.
Discover,
And I'm sure also if I would read through some of our press releases or whatever that we wrote 7 years ago, there's probably stuff in there that I wouldn't write that way. So I think it's important for us to engage in these conversations. But I think there's also a certain group of people where it kind of boils down, it doesn't really matter how we do it.
Yeah, they're still
you can't do it because you're an outsider. And I think this is for me like an argument that I think is sad, because it comes at the expense of people saying the artist whose music we release and who's getting paid to it does not have the freedom of choice to have his music reissued. Doesn't have, and keep in mind this is on average a lot of artists who have not been getting paid from their music in 25 years. And it confuses me sometimes that people are so comfortable with making that decision for an artist's work.
Well, again, that boils down to the consumer now being dictating how the art reaches them. That's the era that we're in.
Yeah.
And also what the internet did was that it opened up everyone's opinion to, like, your opinion is not always valid. You can have an opinion, but that doesn't mean that it's as valid as the truth or as valid as reality, right? I think this conversation comes threefold. I think we were at a time at the top of the pandemic where there was a lot of conversation being had about undoing remnants of colonial existence, which then we realize are very difficult to undo because it's intrinsically tied to everything we do in capitalism. Two, there was the people that have a visual. What's up? You need to change the battery? Yeah.
Sorry.
I can keep talking.
Yeah, keep talking. We're gonna just keep
so there's people who. It's a visual thing for them. It's a black and white or whatever, and they make a decision on that. And then there's the critical race theory relationship between West and East that hasn't changed, because nobody in our community, in our generation yet, bothered to do this work. And it's very important for this work to be done, in my opinion. You know. Now there is.
I was going to say.
Yeah, now there is 100%, you know?
Yeah.
There's Disco Maghreb, there's a bunch of people that are really doing the work, and it's grown. But I think when you started at the beginning point, it wasn't happening.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is also like important for us, like,
develop
yes,
partners.
we are like in a very privileged position, but I feel like when we started this work, our privilege did not mean we had like a kickstart towards the people who maybe have done the exact same job in Cairo or Casablanca, because at least back then maybe these people already existed, but I
didn't know about them.
I didn't know about them.
Yeah, 100%.
Having said that, yeah, I mean, for us, like, the next album we are putting out is a collab with Disco Arabesque, who's like an Egyptian curator, DJ, upcoming record mogul.
Yeah, 100%.
There's Dicraphone, like an upcoming ratio label from Morocco. There's Retro Cassetta, and who's like a great Moroccan DJ who only plays cassette tapes. There's like Beirut Groove Collective, who have been around for a long time as well, and who also like a few years ago started re-releasing music. And we are very close with all of these people, work with them, play shows together. And also, I think when you talk about the criticism, I understand that it's something that comes up, that it's important to talk about. I see myself falling into the same trap of 100 people come to me and it's like, I appreciate the work the label does, keep on going, and then there's one person who's like, fuck you, and you get hung up on that one person.
Of course.
Which I guess is human psychology.
Of course.
But I think it's important to keep that in mind, because on average there's nothing but love for what we do. And I think what also is special about the label in comparison to other reissue labels, I think on average reissue labels do the work they do kind of exclusively for a Western audience. I think the average compilation of Ghanaian boogie disco sounds does not really have much of a listenership in Ghana, because the labels don't reach the potential listenership they could have there. For us, and I can't pinpoint why that is, we've always managed to have the music we re-release also resonate in the cities and countries where some of the music originally was recorded maybe 40 years ago. And I think that is also part of why these critical conversations reach us, because we end up probably being heard by people who then have friends who don't get why their friends actually like that work.
I think it has everything. Sorry to cut you off, but I think it has everything to do with like positionality. You know, coming up in hip hop, I think I was hyper aware of my cultural background and its relationship to America and that relationship to slavery. Right? I'm from Basra. I'm from the south of Iraq. Like the slave trade very much traveled through the area that my family and my ancestors are from, right? So when I started making music, I immediately became hyper aware and did the research and the history to undo those ties in myself that I may have inherited from right? But then like 10 years down the line, after proving myself as an MC and then aligning with the rappers that taught me knowledge of self in the black community, and I was teaching at Concordia, one of my friends came to me and said, you're white passing.
Lord Jamar might still not like
the brand Nubian might still question my authenticity, but I thought about it and I was like, but I'm directly from a country that's the enemy of America at one point in history, and for a very long point. So like my relationship to the source of where the music came from started coming into question, and then my relationship to the music. So like I had all these internal processes that made me aware of them, and it made me a better artist, made me a more aware cultural practitioner, right? Which I think you have. I mean, there's no way you can do the work that you do without that critical thinking that you possess.
I mean, I think in the beginning we to boil it down more to like more very basic examples. For example, we have this continuous style of the covers, which is just the lettering, the name of the artist, and a photo. Yeah. I mean, we really wanted to make sure we don't repeat certain imagery that would be widely associated with the music of with the countries where this music is coming from in Europe. And at the same time, it's also about how we talk about the music, how we try to focus on the artist's own opinion about their music and not really try to find a line in between us talking about it, but more so focusing on the artist's work. And then again, also the way how we structure our deals, how we try to speak about how we structure our deals, and then also work with not only the old musicians, but work with creatives from the quote-unquote region when it comes to
the art
creating
and
our artworks, creating videos, creating merch. And all of these, I think, are little like pieces of a puzzle to kind of answer the question of how should our practice look like, keeping in mind what my personal background is.
That's great.
And I think that, and a second aspect, which I think, but this goes to the question of cultural appropriation. If you look at the type of music we re-release, it tends to be the music where artists took an influence coming from the outside and created a localized version of it. That is predominantly Afro-American influences, but if you look at like the Sudanese music we have reissued, Ethiopian or Congolese music is as influential. But ironically, a lot of these artists, like Onia, for example, I had a conversation with the singer of the band, who said when they released it, the biggest music critique wrote that they're kind of selling out on the heritage of Lebanese music by introducing this Brazilian sounds to it.
That's
a lot
crazy.
of these,
So there's layers
a lot of the artists have been critiqued for including oftentimes quote unquote Western music into their sound. So you start to see how this idea of cultural appropriation, even though the term might not have been around, has been a discourse that was even part of the discussions and the reception of some of the music we re-released back in the days. And it has a certain level of irony that this music now gets put out again, and now there's people who say, well, it's the heritage. But these artists were always giving the impression that what they do is diluting the heritage. They were never, and I'm speaking in very general terms because we have worked with a lot of artists, but on the majority they have, when the music came out, never been appreciated as part of the heritage. They have been seen as like the enemy of the heritage.
We gotta blame the colonizer for that. Shout out to colonialism for fucking up all of our minds to the point that we've reached right now. You single-handedly made the word Habibi hot again. There have been a million Habibis to follow you, to the point where the last episode of my podcast was, please no more Habibis. It was
No, 100%. I
don't mean that in a bad way. I'm kidding.
No. I'm not even kidding. But I'm sure we were not the first ones to use it.
No, of course not. But now everybody is a Habibi now.
Yes, and if I would need to name the label again, I would choose a different name.
Wow.
Because as of now, it feels very overdone in the context of promoting something. I think it does a great job because it's a very catchy name, everyone can remember. And I think having something like this, when you're trying to promote music of artists who people have a harder time remembering, is a great door opener. And it also allows us to, we add like the catalog numbers, so if you don't remember that one great song,
you just look up Habibi.
You put it on Spotify and you find all of the releases. So the name has been a blessing in the sense that people remember it, people manage to find the music we want to promote through it, but I fully get the...
Listen, one more Habibi. This is the last Habibi, okay? That's what this episode is called.
Because I mean, at this point, Habibi Funk, even as a hashtag, is like all over Instagram, and there's like so many. I see stuff I don't want to see, and I don't want to be.
So my last question based on that would be: do you like your Habibis funky? I'm kidding. Peace, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It's been Jannis from Habibi Funk, Jakarta Records. I'm your brother Narcy. This is the IRAQAFELLA Show. Make sure you subscribe, follow, go follow Maktaba. One love. Peace.